Hi, and welcome to my channel. So if you're new to this channel, please do consider subscribing. I appreciate every view, it all adds up, so please do consider subscribing and sharing. Um, Just Stop Oil is a subject I've spoken about on numerous occasions, and their offshoots, Extinction Rebellion and Insulate Britain. These groups are all overlapping, without question. There may be slightly different purported goals, but they unquestionably overlap, and often it's the same people involved. Roger Hallam is one of the UK organisers, somewhat of a shadowy figure. Um, but it's been 4 years now this has been going on. And I can honestly not think of a group that is so widely unpopular as Just Stop Oil is. Um, and this is, in a country that has experienced violent Islamist terror attacks in recent years. But I cannot think of a single group, specifically Just Stop Oil. Extinction Rebellion and Insulate Britain were also deeply unpopular, but Just Stop Oil, it's probably the worst of the three because it seems to be the most militant. But like I say, a lot of the same people are involved. I had hoped at the beginning of this year they'd sort of faded away because there was a very brief period where their activity seemed to be a little bit muted. Um, but I was reading the Times, and apparently there was an event, an incident in Hendon yesterday. There you can see them being dragged away. Feel free to take a screenshot there if you want to read the report. The reporter is just for the sake of, well, actually, it's just the Times report, doesn't name the reporter. There's no byline there. But basically, it's an argument with the police about whether they were actually arrested or moved or not. The police said the only way you're going to move is at the back of a police van. So it's good to see the police toughening up a bit. They claim the police didn't have enough numbers. The police seem to be countering that. Who knows? That reminds me a little bit of the climate summit in Glasgow in 2021, when Extinction Rebellion and co were disappointed that there were not mass arrests, because they wanted to embarrass the government in front of the world, and it didn't really happen as they hoped. Um, there's something about a group that takes pleasure in being arrested so often. It's kind of disturbing. Now, if you look at the Facebook page, Just Stop Oil, they have 12,000 members and 28,000 followers, roughly. The UK has 68 million people. Clearly, there is not widespread support for these groups. And even among those 12,000 likes, I suspect, well, some of them are going to be people like myself who abhor them and have just liked it so that they can comment. And then when we actually get into the hardcore activists, I reckon it's a few hundred, probably a few hundred. Um, so what we have here is a very small minority of zealots who basically think they can hold the country hostage by messing with people's lives, by attacking culture, as they do by vandalizing paintings. Um, and you have a situation where no matter how many times they're arrested, they just keep going back. So they're repeat offenders. As per their own page, it shows them outside courtroom, and it shows, a situation where they're either not acquitted, but they're given a community sentence, or they're cleared of more serious charges. I do think this is one example where the justice system is soft. I think a lot of judges are massively out of touch. I've said that in many videos, but when the government tried to bring in legislation, there was the cries from the likes of Liberty that they're taking away the right to protest. Now, this gets into a realm of normalization. There are too many people out there who wouldn't themselves be part of this vile group. And they might even say they disagree with the tactics, but they will still excuse them. They'll still say, well, they're just frustrated, and they feel no other choice. I have a big problem with that because if you're going to excuse those sort of actions from frustration, well, I'm pretty outspoken about our justice system. If I were to chain myself outside a courtroom, what would happen? All I would do is slow down proceedings. It'd stop defendants and victims from entering the proceedings. It wouldn't help anyone. A lot of people feel frustrated about a lot of things. Um, there's a lot of things one can observe about Just Stop Oil. Firstly, just for the record, I don't give a damn what their opinion is. I no longer care what comes out of their mouths because, firstly, they've shown a complete inability to introspect. They do not care about hurting the public. They just don't care. Whenever that's been brought up to them, they say, "Oh, but we're sorry," but then they'll go on to their little script about how the world's going to end and how they're doing this for future generations. It's interesting they say that because if someone's trying to get their sick baby to hospital, that baby is a future generation. Um, what is noticeable about Just Stop Oil? There is a demographic issue. We can't ignore it. They are predominantly white, and they are predominantly middle class, and some of them are actually quite well off. They come from. I've read cases where they have hedge fund manager parents, and so that's significant because I think if the activists were working class, and I don't like calling them protesters, but if they were working class, they wouldn't be able to constantly afford this bail money. I think that's actually something that needs to be seriously looked at, because what happens when they're brought before court? They're given a community sentence. They don't care. They just go back to doing this. I think there needs to be a creative punishment whereby their bank accounts, their assets are frozen. So, for example, if they do crowdfunding, which they do, one of the hardcore activists, Edward Whitting, actually posted on one of his social media accounts different levels of disruption that people could support, that could fund. That's what's sick about this group. They take pleasure in their criminal activity. They literally take pleasure in it. They're proud of it. And this isn't people who, are being martyrs to some noble cause. It's not like, they're standing up to an oppressive government or against human rights abuses. They're basically taking pride from hurting the public. That is what is so vile about them. That is what's so lamentable. The fact that they literally seem to be proud of hurting ordinary people. I mean, it's notable that you never see them outside Shell or ExxonMobil. And it's either because, the public is a soft target or they really are charlatans and this isn't really about oil. I'm not sure what the answer to that one is. I think there are cult-like aspects about them on the grounds that they remind me of those 17th century millenarianism cults. That is, groups who were religious fanatics and they said the world was going to end and they'd flagellate themselves. And you had them in the Middle Ages as well. But the millenarianism was that, the world would end at the turn of the century at that time, 17th century. And, they heralded disastrous events like the Plague of London as marking that. Well, what this group does is they look at natural disasters around the world and they say it's the end times. But not every natural disaster can be blamed on climate change. I mean, earthquakes, that's geology, it's not climate change. We've had some very deadly earthquakes this year, Turkey, Syria, Morocco. Um, what's happening now in Iceland can't be blamed on climate change. That's a volcanic event, it's a geological event. But even if you say they have a point about that, and I think that I'm someone who is not a climate skeptic completely. I do think there are problems that need to be addressed. But, a lot of their apologists seem to have this attitude that if you criticize Just Stop Oil, you're somehow a climate skeptic. This is, again, something we need to get away from. This idea that the small minority of zealots get to speak for the entire green movement. I do think the wider green movement haven't helped themselves. You get the likes of Greenpeace who basically support them. Um, I think the green movement's had very bad PR in recent years because of their stunts. Now, if they devote their energies to, looking at green businesses, sustainable businesses, um, helping the poorest people actually to be sustainable, there's a lot of other things they could be doing. But stopping people getting to work, stopping people going to funerals, baptisms, weddings, hospital appointments, you name it, it's it's sociopathic. I mean, I honestly think there's no moral difference between what they're doing and some yob on a housing estate, terrorizing a family by breaking the windows, or, I mean, antisocial behavior can ruin lives. And what they're doing actually is really impacting people's lives. It's causing mental strain on the public. It's deeply callous, and they must know that they're widely despised. They must see the comments. They must see public anger. But I think in a very sick way they get this sort of kick out of it because it makes them feel like they're heroes. Like, oh well, all of this, that they'll thank us in the long run. The public will finally thank us. Well, I've made the point before. If we have more floods 10 years from now, if we have hotter summers, more floods, the public will not be saying, oh, well, those people gluing themselves to roads or walking slowly in front of vehicles in 2023, excuse me, um, were right. They will say they won't consider them because this is a deeply unpopular movement. They like to compare themselves to the suffragettes. Well, some people take the approach to that, oh, well, it's different because the suffragettes were a righteous cause. I take a slightly different approach. I actually say, well, that comparison is flawed on the grounds that the suffragettes, I'm not talking about the suffragists, but the suffragettes, and this is something people mix up, were very unpopular. Now, Just Stop Oil says, oh, but they were unpopular and they got women to vote. Well, firstly, that's a matter of debate, actually. The militant activity of the suffragettes was deeply unpopular and it was basically terrorist. They blew up letterboxes and they injured a lot of people. Um, but the fact of the matter is, the peak of suffragette activity was the year 1913. Then came World War One. You had a changing labour market because women done jobs that men had traditionally done. They were a critical part of the war effort. Women didn't actually get full suffrage until 1928. Now, there was the suffragists who were a more passive movement, no less passionate, but more passive. They didn't blow up letterboxes and they didn't aggravate the public in the same way. So, and also you had Emmeline Pankhurst, who, whatever controversy she may have had, she had the sort of sense to show she was patriotic by, you know, putting off the activity during the war years. Although the negative side of that is she fully supported the White Feather campaign, which, was a pretty shameful campaign, which shamed young men to their deaths, basically. So much for male privilege, but that's for another video. The point I'm making here is comparisons with the suffragettes are deeply flawed, and even the suffragettes had more public support than this lot do, and the suffragettes were unpopular. So what does that tell you? Make no mistake, Just Stop Oil are a deeply unpopular group, hated even. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that they're hated. The public hate them, or at least a good part of the public do. There'll be people who excuse them who are a minority. There'll be people who don't think about it that much, and then there'll be a lot of people who really find them aggravating, myself included. And I don't even live in London. I don't drive, and I don't live in London, so they don't directly affect me. But I did know people in recent years who are now members of Just Stop Oil, and it saddens me to see that they've joined this cult. Because I say cult because I think they do show some cult-like symptoms. The doomsday scenarioizing, and also talk of genocide. Now that's something they need to be much more forcefully challenged on, because I think that's a deep insult to Jews, to Rwandans, to Cambodians, to Kurds, i.e., people who've actually experienced genocide in their history. What they're literally saying is the British government is killing millions of people. Now that's an incredibly reckless, alarmist, and inaccurate statement to make. It's um, it's deeply inflammatory. I think it's deeply unethical, and I think when journalists interview them, they always talk about the tactics, and that's fine. But these people, it goes in one ear and out the other. Actually, I'm critical of them getting interviews at all because I think it enables them. Um, Freedom of speech doesn't mean giving people a platform that they don't deserve. But I think I'd like to see journalists hammering them on that. Like, do you not think talking about genocide is insulting the victims of concentration camps? Um, in fact, I would like to see them charged with some hate crime legislation. I think if there was something that could be brought in there, with those sort of claims, I accept that's not easily done. But I just think that there has to be a new approach because clearly what's happening is they're getting arrested finally. I've been very critical of police response. I think that they have been too lax, but they have been, making arrests. To be fair to the police, some of the tactics of this group is different from previous protests. The slow walking in front of cars, that sort of thing. It is relatively new. Having said that, there should be a degree of common sense. Now, the police, what they will do is they will turn up, they will sort of give them a warning to leave. Well, stop negotiating with them. Drag them off the streets, not politely ask them to move. Drag them off. Use water cannon. Use whatever means, non-fatal means, necessary to get them off the road. Um, Recently in Panama, a man shot an eco-protester. Now, I'm not saying that's justified, but clearly around the world you have a situation where ordinary people are having enough. Now, I don't know the full details of that. Maybe that man had a violent history, if he's carrying a gun around. I don't know what gun laws are in Panama, but I think what's remarkable is the incredible patience of the British public. Incredible patience. And I have to say, I'm not a father, but if I was in a situation where I had a sick child and I had to get them to hospital, I would not think twice about taking the law into my own hands and physically removing these people. I'm not the biggest guy around, but if I was angry enough, I would do it. Um, I I don't know. We just cannot have a situation where this continues indefinitely, where 4 years has been going on. I mean, am I going to be talking about this in 2033? How long can this continue? A lot of them are very young, they're 20 years old, university students. I remember when I was that age, I joined protests, I was passionate. You want to change the world. But young activists need to get it into their heads that there's a way to go about things. And there has been no movement in history that has succeeded by polarizing the public. Like I say, the suffragettes are a flawed comparison because it was the suffragists that had more widespread public support. The suffragettes were deeply unpopular. Um, the civil rights movement in the US, Martin Luther King realized he had to get white America on board. People power in the Philippines, there's many examples, but I'm going to wrap this up. But I think there's something very sinister about Just Stop Oil. They claim that they're ordinary people who are worried about the future. The truth is they're sociopaths. They're a minority of extremists, and they may look normal. They may come from normal enough backgrounds, retired doctors, retired clergy. But the truth is this is a cult. And there's something very sinister about a group that just does not care about how much they hurt their fellow citizens. I mean, journalists have to understand at this point that you can ask them those questions. You could say, oh, how do you justify these tactics? And they will always change the subject. They'll always deflect and say, but the world is ending. You can't reason with these people. I don't think you can reason with extremists. So maybe one approach is just to ignore them completely. I mean, arrest them when they do that stuff. But I'm very critical too of how the media keeps giving them a platform. You know, even if it's like the critical line of questioning, why give them a platform? They love the attention. I think they're narcissists. There's a lot of adjectives actually can throw at them. They're narcissists, they're exhibitionists, they're criminals. I refuse to call them protesters. Activists is about the most polite thing I can say. But like I say, when you have people who are hardcore activists, they have a criminal record and they keep going back. clearly something has to change. These judges need to get into the real world and realise that giving them a community sentence or a fine is a waste of time. They've got endless supply of money because they get crowdfunded. Um, and a community sentence, will either not go to it, or they'll go to it, but they'll continue their stunts. They need to be treated like the criminals they are. I'd give them an ankle tag, actually, give them curfews, that sort of thing. They need to feel like criminals because that is what they are. And I'm sick and tired of them hiding behind the protester mantle. Because if you take their logic, you could, basically engage in any sort of criminal act and say, oh, I'm protesting. I feel strongly about this issue. So I'll vandalize a lamppost. I'll stop someone getting to work. They are criminals. And I just think that however normal they may appear on the surface, there is something very, very sinister about the way of thinking, something very deranged about the way of thinking. How else can you explain people who do not care about hurting their fellow citizens? And above anything else, it's a complete failure. It's not achieving anything. It's not stopping oil licenses. Starmer's government or would-be government, has said that he would, stop oil licenses. I really hope that isn't caving into this lot. But the truth is, Starmer, isn't stupid. He knows that there is deep public anger against these people. He has criticised them, but I think he should return donations. Because I think if this continues, there'll be situations of violence. The public will further take matters into their own hands. People have been incredibly patient up to now, but you could have a situation where there's a vehicle ramming incident, where someone will just blow their fuse and ram through them, and there'll be fatalities. And I hope it doesn't come to that, but put it this way.